Test. Test.
No,
Yes, on the mark.
Test.
again.
Test.
conducted the poll during the last 2 weeks in September, started September 14th, finished October 3rd, and covered over 4,000 Arab citizens of Morocco, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates. In 2008, we polled 11 nations across the Arab world for the BBC. One of the questions we asked was, name a leader that you most respect. In 5 of the 11 nations, Bashar al-Assad came in the top 3. That was his standing in 2008. In 2011, the floor has fallen out underneath the government of Syria. When asked the question, on whose side are you, the side of the government of Assad or the demonstrators, the highest that the government of Syria receives is 15% in Morocco and 14% in Egypt. The negative ratings, the ratings with the demonstrators, on the other hand, is from a low of 83% in Morocco to 100% in Jordan. When we ask, can he still govern, the highest he gets is in the single digits. When we ask about the support for the demonstrators themselves and the issues that they raise, again, the numbers are in the 90% range, almost across the board. Even in Lebanon, the demonstrators have a 98% favorable rating as opposed to the government, which is supported by 1%. The Lebanon numbers are instructive because as we look at the Lebanon numbers across the board, we find the Lebanon numbers are rather consistent with other poll findings that we have. 62%, for example, think Hezbollah has played a positive role in Syria, in its relations with Syria. 26% think that Iran has played a positive role, including a majority of people in the Shia community, while only 6% of Sunni and 10% of Christians. But when we then ask the question about support for demonstrators or the regime, you get this 1% with the regime and 98% with the demonstrators, which says that they're being consistent on everything, but on the issue of Bashar al-Assad, the floor has fallen out underneath the regime. He is isolated across the region, and people's sympathies are with the demonstrators. One last point that I'll make before I take some questions, which we'll take online as well as from you here, is with regard to the United States and its performance. The U.S. gets extraordinarily low ratings in Syria, not unexpected. It gets low ratings in the previous 2 polls we did for its behavior across the region. The only country that actually do about the same is Russia, which scores quite poorly, and Iran. Turkey scores well across the board, and Saudi Arabia does well everywhere but in Lebanon. The cautionary note: this is an issue that is best solved in the region. I don't think there's any tolerance for a U.S. role that would be one, for example, envisioned by some of the candidates for president who want the president to do more, be more aggressive, and or to take some hostile action against the government of Syria. The government of Syria seems to be doing just fine, isolating itself, if that's the goal, is to get regime change. I think the mood in the region and the mood in Syria is moving in one direction. I think the U.S. would only be a negative factor in this process, and the numbers seem to indicate that. So I'll stop there and take any questions that you might have. Yeah. Yes.
Yes. The numbers seem kind of ambiguous with regards to the United States. Are they saying we're playing a negative role because we're not interfering, or we're playing a negative role in the Middle East because we are interfering?
We didn't ask the question about whether they wanted interference or non-interference, but the numbers are low. And I think that the numbers are low because almost anything that involves the U.S. in polling that we do comes out low. So it's not a question of you're low because you're not doing enough. It's you're low because you're the United States. That's what we got in the last poll that we did, and we asked on other issues. The two big issues in the Middle East, across the Middle East, are one, U.S. performance on the Arab-Israeli conflict, and two, U.S. interference in the region. And so those are the two big negatives that keep coming up. And therefore, I would look at these numbers and say there is no tolerance for a more aggressive U.S. role. Now, Syrian opposition may want it. I'm just not sure the region will tolerate it. Yes?
Regarding Lebanon as a country or just Hezbollah who are supporting the Syrian regime?
Actually, no one is supporting the Syrian regime. The Lebanon numbers are pretty clear. There's only 1% support in Lebanon for the Syrian regime. So the interesting thing is that there's a bit of a contradiction here. 62% of people in Lebanon say that they think Hezbollah has played a positive role in its relation to Syria. That's because Hezbollah has positive rating in Lebanon. I mean, some people in Lebanon don't like the fact that it gets a positive rating. They want to say that the Hezbollah rating is low, but actually Hezbollah does pretty well in Lebanon. Iran, on the other hand, only gets a 26% favorable rating for its performance in Syria. But none of those speak to the Syrian regime. The Syrian regime gets a almost zero rating in Lebanon, like 1% favorable rating in Lebanon. So even though Hezbollah is supporting the regime in Syria, it hasn't diminished yet their favorable rating in Lebanon, but it hasn't also helped the Syrian regime's rating in Lebanon either. So people on the one hand will say, yes, we think Hezbollah is playing a positive role, but no, we don't like the Syrian regime. I would think a warning to Hezbollah is the longer they persist, it may impact their favorable rating as well. It certainly has caused a diminishment in Iran's favorable rating in Lebanon, which in the last poll we did 3 months ago was much higher. This has dragged down Sunni numbers, dragged down Christian numbers, but it hasn't diminished Shia support for Iran.
We've got a few questions coming in via email and live stream. First on Jordan, 100% figure.
Yeah.
Question about how rare that is in polling.
It's extraordinarily rare to get that kind of number. And like I said, whenever I get numbers like that, 99%, 98%, I always question the validity of those numbers. But in this case, I have to trust the numbers because all the other numbers in the rest of the poll we did come out as nuanced and as conflicted as one would expect in any society that you poll. But on this issue and this issue alone, what we got was a very negative rating about the Assad regime. And let me say that when the Arab League passed its resolution on Muammar Gaddafi, I thought, and I think many people thought, that that was a one-off proposition. Muammar Gaddafi had worked long and hard to make himself bizarre in the Arab world, to make himself unwanted in the Arab world. In fact, he declared himself not an Arab, but actually an African, and encouraged Libyan men to marry African women to make clear that they were no longer part of the Arab world. I mean, his bizarre behavior, his problematic policies, his support of terrorism, etc., made him an outcast. I could not imagine anyone else in short order making themselves an outcast in the Arab world. I think that the regime in Syria has done that. Part of it is their behavior, clearly. Part of it is also Arab Spring. There is, in other words, a different set of expectations and a different tolerance level for this kind of behavior. So you may not agree, but with the opposition in Syria, I think the opposition in Syria is probably ill-defined in the Arab world. We didn't ask detailed questions about that. But in terms of a government in a systematic way behaving as the Syrian regime is, means that in Jordan, whether you are a reformer or a non-reformer, you're outraged. And because of that outrage, you get those kinds of numbers. And even in Lebanon, you get those kinds of numbers where, like I said, people in Lebanon have had a different relationship. Some have been supportive of Syria, some have not been supportive of Syria. But in terms of the question, are you with the regime or with the demonstrators, almost uniformly, people are with the demonstrators.
Another question on the implications of U.S. interference. The range of conversations is from no-fly zones to Senator McCain saying we actually need to go into a military operation. Your sense of what the implication, if the U.S. does indeed engage militarily?
Thank God John McCain's not making those decisions. I think that you know, to some degree, President Obama handled the Libya thing much better than one might have expected. In that, he said weeks, not days, not months, and that we were going to lead from behind. I don't think the region is interested in America leading from being in front right now. And clearly, on this issue of Syria, when you also have a 0 rating in Jordan, an 11% in Saudi Arabia, a 0% in Lebanon, people aren't really interested in America providing the leadership role. We're just beginning to extricate ourselves from the mess of Iraq. And people in the region see us as having created the mess in Iraq. Syria is host of almost 1 million refugees from Iraq, as is Jordan. People aren't interested in America taking the role of once again getting involved militarily in an Arab country. Libya, I think in that regard, was the exception. It was almost as if we're fed up with him, do whatever you have to do. But in this case, I think that there's a difference, a big difference. And therefore, I think that the candidates who are proposing more direct military action have completely wrong.
One more. After the violence in Libya, the way that it's all playing out, what do you worry about for Syria that way?
Well, I think that the violence in Libya has to be worrisome, in the sense that it, on the one hand, if you're the regime, you say we got to hang on because that could be a fate that's ours. If you're Alawi, and you look at what's been happening with some of the mass executions of supporters of Gaddafi, you say this is the fate that we expect, and so it only intensifies the conflict. I think for the world community, especially for those who supported the Libyan opposition, this has to be very worrisome. Worrisome in the sense that you have behaviors that are unacceptable and are not displaying a commitment to democracy or rule of law or justice, and it's got to be of concern. And so I think that the Syrian opposition is somewhat in the same situation, in that what control do they have? What organizational structure do they have? They can make pronouncements from different places, but can they control the aftermath situation? Or is the propaganda of the regime going to now be listened to, and that is that if it's not us, it's chaos, and it's more bloodshed in a rather brutal manner. So I think we have to take a look at this. Each one of these situations as they unfold speak to others. The Libya situation is not speaking well to others, and I think it's therefore a concern. Tunisia, I think, speaks in a very different way, but each one of them will have consequences. Tunisia will have very positive consequences. Libya right now is not looking so good. Syria, I think, is still on the scales being weighed one way or another, how it ultimately goes. Anything else? That's it. I want to thank those of you who are watching for tuning in and for the questions we got. And that's it. Thank you all very much.